tonight.
The federal government is out of control. An unhinged, double-minded, simple-minded man who is not being held accountable.
The National Guard arrives in Chicago. What is the plan and what kind of welcome should they expect? Then the second anniversary of the terror attacks that triggered the ongoing war in Gaza, killing more Jews in a single day since the Holocaust. Since then, 207 hostages have been brought home, among them Keith Siegel, an American hostage who spent 484 days in Hamas hell. He joins me tonight as we remember dozens alive and dead still in those tunnels.
All right, plenty to get to on this Tuesday night, but we begin in Chicago, where the National Guard is now reporting for duty, despite a big lawsuit and bigger objections from local Democratic leaders. Hundreds of National Guard troops from Texas are now at a training center in Illinois, just an hour outside the nation's third largest city. They're joining hundreds of Illinois troops already in the Chicago area. They are all there under President Trump's order to protect federal property and federal immigration agents from what the White House calls violent riots and lawlessness, like this scene outside a Chicago ICE facility just this past weekend. Illinois' Governor J.B. Pritzker has dismissed the president's move as political theater. But that's not the whole story. We're learning that immigration officers in Illinois just arrested a suspected Latin Kings street gang member who they say placed a bounty on a senior Border Patrol official, $10,000 for the murder of Gregory Bovino, Commander-at-Large of the U.S. Border Patrol. But it's the deployment of the military against the wishes of the governor that has local leaders up in arms. Chicago's mayor today called the troop deployment illegal and unconstitutional. His message to the military: we don't need you here, and this isn't what you're trained to do.
What's really disturbing about all of this is that the National Guard, they have no policing authority or any policing powers. It's not what they're trained to do. And so, you know, the intel that we have received, obviously, is that this president is determined to federalize the National Guard and to occupy our cities with the military.
Now, these troops are coming despite a lawsuit from the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago. A judge is set to hear arguments on that on Thursday. But President Trump says if governors and courts keep blocking him from sending in troops, he'll consider invoking the Insurrection Act.
It's been invoked before, as you know. If you look at Chicago, Chicago's a great city where there's a lot of crime. And if the governor can't do the job, we'll do the job. It's all very simple.
His threat to invoke the Insurrection Act is serious. This is rarely done. So let's go to NewsNation's Alex Capriello, live for us on the streets of Chicago. Alex, there are a lot of moving parts here. When are we expecting to see these troops actually hit the streets?
Yeah, that's a great question, Elizabeth. And despite multiple requests for that specific information, we still don't have a very clear idea of when or where these National Guardsmen will go when they do hit the Chicago streets. Now, keep in mind, they are quite a distance away and they're still in training. They're stationed right now in the village of Elwood. It's about an hour southwest of where I'm currently standing here in Broadview. A federal judge denied Governor J.B. Pritzker's request for that temporary restraining order, but of course we know that is not the end of this fight. Oral arguments are scheduled for this Thursday, where we expect the attorneys for the state to argue that the National Guard deployment right here in Illinois is unconstitutional. While that lawsuit plays out, another one was filed on Monday, this time by the ACLU, one of multiple, claiming protesters' rights have been violated outside of this very Broadview detention facility. The attorneys argue federal agents aren't trained for local policing, and their tactics, quote, involve the indiscriminate use of force, arresting people without legal basis. Also, new video obtained by NewsNation seems to back that claim up. Watch closely here. This is a Presbyterian minister pepper sprayed while protesting on the front lines. He claims he was hit at least 7 times in the face, the arms, and the torso with chemical agents. He's one of many examples in the last few weeks of federal agents using less lethal methods like tear gas and flashbangs to disperse protesters. And the protesting does continue here outside the Broadview ICE facility, despite the new city ordinance saying that protests must end at 6 p.m. Back to that ACLU lawsuit, there were several members of the Trump administration that were actually named. That includes DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, Border Patrol Chief Gregory Bovino, as well as U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi. Elizabeth?
Yeah, Alex, there's also a video of that minister being shot in the head with a rubber bullet a short time after being sprayed, so I'm sure we'll hear a lot more in this lawsuit. Alex Capriello reporting live in Chicago. Let's get reaction now from our panel. Chris Clem is a retired Border Patrol chief in Yuma, Arizona, and John Sandwig is a former acting ICE director under President Obama and the former acting director of general counsel at the DHS. Great to have both of you here. So, John, I'll start with you, since you're also a lawyer. I'm going to be going to a lot. The Texas National Guard arrived. They're just outside Chicago. What do you expect the National Guard to do in the city once they deploy? Because President Trump is talking about crime in Chicago, but the order seems to be restricted just to protecting ICE facilities and ICE agents.
Yeah, Elizabeth. Yeah, this is a big question, right? This is an issue that came up in California, where initially the Ninth Circuit found that the deployment of the Guard itself was lawful, but then a district court judge found that the activities that the Guard members were doing in Los Angeles was itself unlawful. Now, that order was also stayed by the Ninth Circuit, but that's going to be an issue here in Chicago. So tomorrow, the judge will decide whether or not the president has the authority to call up the Guard, whether or not he's capable of enforcing federal law with the regular order, with federal law enforcement. If the court allows the Guard to proceed up into the city, the big question will be, what can they do? And Elizabeth, obviously, the issue is this posse comitatus law, which restricts the activities of the Guardsmen. But that also kind of lays into what will be the value of the Guard member. If they're very limited to what they can do from an operational perspective, they don't carry much value.
Right. The court order in California restricted the Guard to just protecting federal buildings and federal facilities, no police work at all. Chris, President Trump renewed his criticism of Illinois leaders speaking from the Oval Office today, saying, quote, they don't know what they're doing when it comes to crime. But Chicago police crime statistics show a 28% drop in murders from last year, a 50% drop from 4 years ago. Still too high there, but just ask any Chicagoan. But there have been big drops in recent years.
Yes, good evening. And there has been a lot of drops in actually reporting of crime across a lot of these major cities. We've seen that documented across the country, and that's come out over the last several months in the last year. I think the president is right. You see what is happening on the streets. I think we've gone from a fine line of peaceful protests and First Amendment rights to assaulting federal officers. That pastor, the very beginning of that clip, has his hands on federal officers. That's going to get a response. We're not here to enforce feelings. We're there to enforce the law. And as far as the National Guard, the objection there is, or should I say the object there, is what it's always been, to go out there and protect. That's what they do when it's time of disaster. And this situation in law enforcement, protect the facilities, allow the federal agents to go out there and do their job as safely as they can, provide that perimeter, provide that support, and protect those federal facilities. Yeah,
as the police chief said yesterday in a news conference, you are constitutionally protected to go out and protest. You cannot put your hands on an agent or an officer, and you cannot impede them in any way with your car or your body. John, Governor Greg Abbott of Texas defended sending his National Guard troops to Illinois, saying, quote, the president has the authority to call up the Guard. That's exactly the opposite of what Governor Abbott said 1 year ago when President Biden wanted to send the Guard to staff the Space Force. At that time, Governor Abbott refused and signed a letter calling it, quote, an overreach and a threat to more than a century of precedent. Doesn't his flip-flop make this look political?
You know, Elizabeth, I think this whole thing has become so politically charged. That's the unfortunate reality. I think even Chris would agree that in an ideal world, federal law enforcement are working hand in hand with state and local partners, right? And if we want to tackle crime, we're going to do that in a collaborative manner. We do a lot of federal task forces working on those high value targets. Unfortunately, we've gotten to this point where everything is so charged politically that it's really hard for the federal and state law enforcement to work collaboratively. I will say this, however, we saw on Friday some of these protests outside there at Broadview. And Broadview in particular, Elizabeth, is a hard facility for to handle these protests because it's on a very narrow street with only one gate in and out of the facility. But we saw there a strong deployment of state police, and the protests were peaceful on Friday. And I think that is what ideally we would see, where that state police can serve as a neutral force. We need to protect ICE agents. They need to be able to do their job without being impeded and without having to risk about their own personal safety. But we also need to allow these people to exercise their First Amendment rights. But in a perfect world, this would be done in collaboration, working together, federal and state, but that's just not the reality where we are today.
Yeah, the ICE agents are simply doing their job. Protesters should be protesting the people who assigned the orders as opposed to the people executing the orders. Listen, AG Pam Bondi was in the Senate hearing for most of the day today. She refused in that hearing today to answer any questions about what the legal rationale is for the president to send in the National Guard over Governor Pritzker's objections. She wouldn't even say if she had spoken to the White House about this. Take a listen.
You won't even say whether you talked to the White House about this?
I am not going to discuss any internal conversations with the White House with you, Ranking Member.
I noticed that. What's the secret? Why do you want to keep this secret?
Again, John, you're a lawyer. Many legal experts say that President Trump does not, in fact, have the legal authority to send in the Guard over governor's objections. It's being fought in court on Thursday in Chicago and on Thursday in Oregon, where they're fighting the same fight. What do you think, given your legal experience?
I think, Elizabeth, if you look at the Ninth Circuit case, they gave the president incredible deference. I would think that we're going to see something similar here in Chicago. Now, that said, a Trump-appointed judge
to allow
in Oregon,
the Guard to protect federal buildings and federal
to allow
agents.
the Guard to protect. Yeah, well, the Ninth Circuit hasn't answered that question yet about what activities they can do. The initial threshold question is the deployment itself lawful, right? The Oregon court, in a very, clearly documented that there has not been violence outside of the ICE building in Portland in the last 2 or 3 months. She found that, in fact, that the deployment itself was unlawful, that the idea of federalizing the National Guard itself is unlawful. I think in Chicago, you have different facts, you have a different judge. But I would expect that if they apply that same level of deference that we saw in the Ninth Circuit in Los Angeles, then they're going to allow the deployment. But of course, Elizabeth, the question quickly pivots to what activities will they do?
Right.
Are they limited to just standing in front of that federal building, or can they go out there with the ICE agents on patrol, and have more significant, more law enforcement-esque encounters with the public?
Chris, I want to ask you about an article that caught our eye today in the Wall Street Journal. It's reporting that thousands of federal agents have been pulled from crime fighting to immigration enforcement. The article says, quote, a federal team in El Paso that once pursued child traffickers has been disbanded. A Kansas task force focused on stemming the flow of fentanyl has been redirected. Highway checkpoints on major drug trafficking routes have gone unstaffed. The article goes on to report that the numbers of prosecutions are down in double digits, percentage-wise. Is this a concern, pulling all these FBI, Border Patrol, and even Postal Service agents from their jobs to round up illegal immigrants?
Not a concern at all, because we had thousands of FBI agents looking into January 6th type situations. So I will tell you this. Their priority is directed under the Department of Justice and their various cabinet secretaries to answer the call for the president's mission when it comes down to going after these criminal illegal aliens and these gang members and all these violent offenders. We see the list of the people that are being arrested. So instead of sitting there behind a desk kicking around for a year or more on an investigation, they can go out there and address this crime issue. I can assure you that these federal task forces, these state and locals that John had just mentioned, they're still operating. They just have prioritized things to go after the mission that is at hand right now, that is reducing these criminal illegal aliens and all the things that are going on across the country. So I don't feel concerned at all. I think it's well organized, and the priorities are being met by the administration.
All right. So you think both things can still continue to, because I think most people would say child sex traffickers and fentanyl trafficking are big issues.
And they're arresting those people right now in Chicago and LA and all the major cities. So they can be both done at the same time. So look at the stats. The stats will show that these cases are still being addressed and they're still being answered. And some of the people that ICE and Border Patrol and all the feds around the country are arresting have those kind of criminal histories.
Chris Clem, John Sandweg, appreciate you both. Thank you for coming on tonight.
You got
All
it.
right, coming up for us, as Israel marks the brutal terrorist attacks on October 7th 2 years ago, is the country closer than ever to a peace deal with Hamas? I will speak to a freed American hostage and also to the former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, about that next. On this October 7th, 2025, it's a day of somber remembrance of the horrific terror attacks in Israel at the hands of Hamas militants 2 years ago today. The deadly attack triggered the war in Gaza that has been raging ever since. President Trump met in the White House today with Adon Alexander, the American-Israeli soldier who was held captive by Hamas terrorists for nearly 600 days. The family of Omer Nutra also met with the president. Nutra's body is still in Gaza. They are two of the more than 250 people Hamas captured in that attack 2 years ago. 48 hostages still remain captive, 20 of whom are believed to be alive. Today's meeting comes amid hopeful signs that a peace deal could be within reach. Indirect talks between Israel, Hamas, and the United States are taking place in Egypt. The two sides have agreed to key parts of President Trump's 20-point peace proposal, but no clear timeline for the release of those remaining hostages has been set up. Nevertheless, President Trump today expressed optimism.
We are very close to making a deal on the Middle East that will bring peace to the Middle East. We want a release of the hostages immediately, etc. And so our team is over there now. Another team just left, and other countries, literally every country in the world has supported the plan. But there's a real chance that we could do something.
While many may blame Israel for the current state of hostilities in the region, it is always helpful to remember exactly how this war started and who started it 2 years ago. Thousands of Hamas militants infiltrated Israel by land and air. 1,200 Israelis were killed, the most Jews slaughtered in a single day since the Holocaust. Those hundreds of hostages we told you about were abducted into Gaza, beaten and starved, forced to live in dark tunnels. And, of course, many were raped, a brutal weapon of war that Hamas has inflicted on its female hostages, at times even forcing other hostages to watch. These are the dire conditions that Keith Siegel remembers all too well. The Israeli American spent 15 months as a hostage. Hamas has little regard for the Geneva Conventions concerning the treatment of prisoners of war. Siegel was the barely living proof. When he was released in February, he looked like a walking corpse. His emaciated body and his weak physical condition told their own story, and his own testimony soon backed it up. Siegel said he was kept in the dark, told to lie on the floor in silence with his eyes closed. His last month of captivity, he was kept all alone. But he survived. His siblings reportedly said Siegel maintained his sanity by tracking the calendar, repeating the day, week, and number of days of his captivity to himself every single day, throughout the day. It became for him a mantra of sorts to stay sane and alive. And Keith Siegel joins us now. Keith, thank you so much for coming back to the show. First of all, I always ask you this, how are you doing now? I'm hoping you're better and better each time I speak to you.
Thank you very much for having me. This is my 5th trip to the U.S. since I was released 8 months ago. I have been here with my wife, Aviva, who was also kidnapped. We were kidnapped together. We have been here to advocate for the release of the hostages, and that is our life since we were released. Aviva and I are committed to doing whatever we can to bring all of the hostages, all of the 48 hostages, back as soon as possible.
I can imagine you must think about them constantly, because you are one of the very, very few who knows exactly what they're enduring.
Yes. I know the abuse, I know the violence, I know the starvation, I know being deprived of water, not being able to clean my body, witnessing torture, women being tortured, beaten, handcuffed, tied at their feet. The suffering, the life-threatening situation that I was in and that the hostages that are still in Gaza are in, and there are still 48 hostages being held by Hamas terrorists in Gaza for now 2 years. I spent time with 4 of them that are still there at separate times. My friends, Gali and Ziv Berman from my community of Gaza, Omri Miran, and Matan Angrist. I never believed I would be released, and that my 4 friends and that 48 hostages altogether would remain in Gaza.
Yeah,
I'm doing whatever
Omri's brother-in-law was on this show last night, and he told me that he feels you helped his brother stay alive. He's just guessing, having talked to you. But I know you spent an extraordinary amount of time underground in these tunnels. How did you do that, Keith? How did you survive that?
The survival instinct and believing and promising myself that I must stay alive, I must survive to return to my family. I had made that promise to myself, and I had promised Aviva when we were separated after 50 days. Aviva was released. The terrorists told us I would be released the next day after Aviva was released. I stayed in Gaza for another 433 days.
But there must have been times when you wanted to give up.
There were never times that I wanted to give up, because as I said, I felt like I must survive. I must be reunited with my family. I must bring an end to my family's suffering that I was sure was much greater than mine. And just the thought of what they were going through created within me a very, very strong feeling that I must survive to get back to them.
How optimistic are you that this latest negotiation, these negotiations taking place in Egypt, are going to finally lead to this is the first time in 2 years Hamas has said in principle it will release all the hostages, both living and dead. Are you optimistic that it will finally happen?
I am optimistic, and President Trump's efforts and engagement and his commitment to releasing all the hostages, he has been there since day one when he was inaugurated, and I see the urgency that he sees to bring all of the hostages home. I am very, very optimistic, and I would like to thank President Trump again for bringing me home to my family and many, many other hostages. And I am encouraging him, and I know he will, to continue putting pressure in order to get this agreement secured and to bring all of the 48 hostages back home.
And very, very, very quick, if you could get one message to the remaining hostages who are still alive in those tunnels, what's the one thing you would say to them tonight?
Yes, I would like to say to my friends that are still held hostage in Gaza by Hamas terrorists, Gali and Ziv Berman, Omri Miran, and Matan Angrist, if you hear me, if you see me, you should know that your families and I and many, many other released hostages and many, many people in Israel and all around the world are doing everything that we can to get you released. And I think we're on the verge of that. Keep strong. I love you, and I'm dreaming, hoping, and believing that we will see each other soon.
Keith Siegel, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Really appreciate it, and it's wonderful to see you looking healthy.
Thank you so much.
All right. Keith Siegel is one of the lucky ones. He survived his Hamas captivity. There are dozens more being held in Gaza, but only 20 of them are believed to be alive. Securing their release is a key point in President Trump's 20-point plan. As usual, any talk of a Gaza ceasefire is cause for both optimism and skepticism. To drill down on those talks, we're joined now by Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the United States. Mr. Ambassador, great to have you on the show. So there are reports they're making progress in these peace talks in Egypt. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are on their way there. They arrive tomorrow morning, Egypt time. Are you optimistic that we're going to finally get a deal?
First of all, always good to be with you, Elizabeth. Good evening, and I'm honored and humbled to be interviewed after Keith Siegel. What an extraordinary human being.
Yeah, he is.
Human being. Guardedly optimistic. Guardedly optimistic. Why? Right? They say that President Trump tweeted just a few hours ago that an agreement had been reached between the sides on the extent and location of Israel's withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in return for releasing the hostages. But Hamas has other demands, which have yet to be met. They want to keep their guns. They want to stay in Gaza after the war. They want to be part of the post-war government in Gaza. And of the 20 points, it voids all that. The 20 points say that Hamas can't keep its guns. The 20 points say that Hamas cannot be part of the post-war solution and governance of Gaza. So is Hamas going to go quietly into that dark night? We don't know. But, I trust the president. The president has never let us down. He's got an extraordinary team. And I'll tell you, as a historian of diplomacy in the Middle East, the 20 points is a work of diplomatic genius. It's
right.
a great, elegant work. So, yes, I have reason to be optimistic, but let's also be realistic. We're dealing with a terrorist organization that is not an honest negotiator. It's going to be loosey with the football all the time. And at some point, I think the president's going to have to say, enough is enough, take it or leave it.
Hamas issued a statement today on the 2-year anniversary of the attack, celebrating it, calling it, quote, glorious and heroic. How do you even negotiate with a group like this?
They are a terrorist group, and that terrorist group has supporters around the world. There were protests around the world, demonstrations in praise of the massacre of 1,200 Israelis, the beheadings, the rapes, the burning alive, and of course the hostage taking. So we're dealing with a deeply evil organization, and this war has been about many, many things. But at base, I sincerely believe it's a battle between good and evil. It's a battle for our common civilization in Israel and America and the West. Because these terrorists, they're not Palestinian nationalists. The word Hamas doesn't have the word Palestine in it. They want to create an Islamic extremist state that will use Palestine at its base to then expand across the Middle East and then expand across the globe. And all those freedoms which you and I cherish, they deny. They want to deny us those freedoms. And you look at those pictures and you know who we're dealing with.
Once Hamas said on Friday that it was willing to free all the hostages, living and dead, the first time in 2 years that they have said that, President Trump publicly went on social media and then went on camera and said Israel must stop attacking Gaza. Those attacks have not stopped. They're continuing even today. Why is Netanyahu ignoring Trump on that one issue and continuing its bombing of Gaza?
I don't think he's ignoring it, Elizabeth. I think and I'm not a spokesman for this now, but I believe what he has said to the president is, listen, we have tens of thousands of troops in the Gaza Strip. We have to defend them. And Hamas hasn't accepted the ceasefire. Hamas keeps coming after these troops. And we're going to have to take what measures are necessary to defend them. So what Israel has done is cease offensive operations. Israel was in the process of basically capturing the last bastion of Hamas control in Gaza City. It's a big city. That offensive operation is halted, but not the defensive operations. You can't expect Israeli soldiers to just lay down their guns and let Hamas shoot them.
All right. Ambassador Michael Oren, I know you, along with the rest of the world, will be watching very, very closely in the next couple of days to see if some deal can be reached and those hostages can finally be freed. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Today marks day 7 of the federal government shutdown, with no visible signs of progress that lawmakers will be breaking that deadlock anytime soon. NewsNation's Leland Vitter did speak to the House Speaker Mike Johnson today about the back pay issue for federal workers.
Would you support a bill that reopens the government but does not provide back pay for every federal employee that was still on the payroll?
No, I don't think that's going to be the issue. I think the Democrats, if they'll come in here and do the sensible thing tonight or tomorrow and reopen the government, all of this is a moot point. We'll take care of the problem.
The full interview airs tonight on Balance with Leland Vitter. But for now, let's go to NewsNation's Joe Khalil live in Washington. Joe, President Trump mused aloud today from the Oval Office that federal employees who are furloughed might not be getting back pay as they have in previous shutdowns. But there's a lot of mixed messages coming out of the White House. What are you hearing?
Yeah, and I can tell you, Elizabeth, that landed really much like a surprise here on Capitol Hill, even among lawmakers who are very close to President Trump. I don't think anybody expected that. This started because there was an Office of Management and Budget memo that was reportedly circulating, and it suggested that actually the 2019 law, which, by the way, President Trump signed into law, doesn't necessarily mean that all federal workers who are furloughed have to get paid. Even though if you read the law, that is almost explicitly what it says, but it looks like OMB's searching for a loophole here. And again, there were a lot of Republicans today, including leadership, that responded with a bit of confusion and had their own impressions. Take a listen to Senate Republican leader John Thune here.
I haven't looked at the memo specifically yet. My assumption is that furloughed workers will get back pay. But that being said, this is very simple. Open up the government, and this is a non-issue. We don't have to have this conversation.
So, Elizabeth, Democrats today have essentially made the opposite argument and said there is no nuance in the law. It is clear furloughed workers are entitled by law to the money that they should get in terms of back pay. I talked to Senator Andy Kim, a Democrat from New Jersey, and he gave me a different perspective. It was just sort of what he's hearing from federal workers more generally. And I thought it was a perspective that was worth playing. This is what he told me about what he's hearing in his home state.
This is compounded on top of what they've been experiencing this year. I mean, I had federal workers tell me that they feel targeted. One told me that they wake up every day feeling like they're being portrayed as the enemy. That was the word that they used, the enemy. You know, this is an administration that has undertaken the largest firing of federal workers in modern American history, denigrating them, calling them criminals and deep state.
So to be clear, if there are federal workers who do not end up getting back pay, Elizabeth, we may very well see lawsuits as a result of that. Again, it's not clear what exactly is going to happen. By the way, no votes tonight on reopening the shutdown. We're looking forward to tomorrow where we see more votes.
Oh, all right, Joe Khalil, see you back here tomorrow night. Thank you so much. Coming up for us, a big night continues here on NewsNation. Eric Trump is set to join our own Chris Cuomo in just a moment. I'll talk to Chris live about his big interview next. All right, I'm joined now by Chris Cuomo, and you're about to have a pretty wide-ranging interview with Eric Trump. What are you going to talk about?
Well, he's got a new book out. You know, I think it's very interesting to get the perspective of the Trump family and how that compares and contrasts with what you may think about their experience and what was righteous and what wasn't righteous. So that's interesting to me, especially on this day, right? On October 7th. This has been a tough day for a lot of people, and to a large extent, it's also for the wrong reasons. I would have never imagined, Elizabeth, that 2 years after October 7th, the Jews would be under a heavier threat than they were that day. I would have never imagined it, but here we are.
Yeah, I found myself remembering that day 2 years ago and the absolutely, utterly shocking images and stories that we were learning as the day progressed about how horrific it was. Yeah. It's really something. Anyway, I'll look forward to it. Have a great show.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.